Do you think that the government's reaction to the pandemic has been blown out of proportion? So let that sink in for a moment. If you are feeling like they did, you're not alone. A new national survey found that almost a quarter of the population believe that the government and health officials have actually exaggerated their warnings when it comes to the coronavirus. I mean, this may be shocking for some, other people are nodding their heads. What is your reaction to this?
I mean, I have to say that right now I find it a bit bizarre, and I'm not a parent, but I find it a bit bizarre that, like, usually when there's a disaster, it's like, get the women and children out first. And right now we have schools open, and it's like one of the only settings that are open during the pandemic, and it's all children and it's mostly women. And, simultaneously, there's this idea of disaster capitalism where, the government and policymakers sometimes use disasters to push forward their agenda. And I think what's happening with schools, at least here in Alberta, is very much connected to the agenda to privatize schools. And I think we could make a similar case for the ways in which we're pushing online teaching in universities. So, my thinking is that I think it's actually good for citizens to be suspicious of their governments and of our policymakers. The reality is there's so much about this virus we don't know. But I'm like, okay, so be suspicious, yes, but please wear a mask.
Mm.
I get that some folks might feel that it's overblown. And I would suggest that probably for those folks, they haven't been impacted by COVID. But if you look at globally, we're experiencing something that none of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And it has wreaked havoc and done significant damage in the lives of individuals, not only here in Canada, but across the world. So I get that people are suspicious. I don't think that it's overblown. I think that it has been measured. The response has been measured by officials and governments, certainly here in Canada, but across the globe as well. I think that we have to take global pandemics seriously for what they are. And I would also suggest that, when we have individuals that, maybe don't think it's that big of a deal, maybe it's that none of us like that our lives have been upended and disrupted. But I think that we have a responsibility to one another, not only for those folks that are in our sacred circle, but to each other, to take this seriously. And, it's the little bit that we can do to ensure that people are safe and healthy. So, none of us want to have our lives disrupted and not be able to do the things that we like to do and we want to do. But this hopefully is just for a short period, and we should all take our responsibility very seriously to keep people safe.
I want to hear from one of our viewers. Bev wrote to us on Facebook. Bev says, let's not start behaving like some Americans. Think of the number of people who've died. Think of the elderly who passed away in homes because of COVID. Do you think it's still overblown? Thanks for that, Bev. And I really want to sort of touch on one thing that Bev said at the beginning of her message, which is let's not start behaving like Americans. Because we really do live in a borderless society these days in terms of the information that's exchanged and a lot of the behaviors. And we are so close to America. And that is a country that has demonstrated a lot of distrust for government, but also a lot of distrust for science and information. And also, I think, media. I think about a movie called Nightcrawler that came out a few years ago starring Jake Gyllenhaal. And the film was about how news coverage typically leads with sensationalism, like if it bleeds, it leads. Now, that is a very American approach to news coverage, and typically we are more restrained and responsible here in Canada. But for the people out there, the 25% of people, and I'm not saying they should not believe in the seriousness of COVID, but there is this general sense that like the news and the media and the government and the everybody is hyping up and overblowing things for headlines to get more hits, to get more traffic, to get more eyeballs. And it can lead to like a numbing of information that people are just like, that's all noise. And all the COVID
Hmm.
information is getting lumped in with the other noise, because there is a lot of noise out there. And that COVID, unfortunately, seriousness and urgency is being lumped in with that. And I'm worried about that 25% of people.
It's also the fact that people are spending a lot of time online, and they are getting sucked into, I feel like, conspiracy theory videos. And remember, right at the beginning of the pandemic, there was that video going around of a doctor. I don't even think it was an actual doctor, but he was wearing scrubs and he was like rubbing down every single piece of his groceries as he came home. And I mean, since then, we found out that the actual amount of chances that you could get the virus from surfaces is actually quite low. But at the time, I think everybody was getting their groceries and like doing that because we just didn't know. And there has been some waffling on back and forth on the part of the health officials. You know, it felt like to some degree that it was like no risk to the public early on in the year, and then all of a sudden it was a big risk to the public. And there was a lot of messaging around, or mixed messaging around, masks and so forth. So I do understand on the one hand why people have lost trust a little bit in public health, but please, I for anybody, like my mother recently said a friend of hers sent her this video from this supposedly Italian doctor. It was all subtitled, and he was talking about like the potential for the vaccine to be this, huge, terrible thing. And I'm just like, stop forwarding this stuff. We're doctors and scientists are learning more every day, but I think we have to trust our government to some degree if we want to move forward with any type of calmness. You have to trust your leaders. Otherwise, it's anarchy.